Good evening. Welcome to Elyria City Council. This is a special meeting for June 14th, 2021. At this time, I'd like to stand for a moment of reflective silence followed by the pledge. The pledge. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk's office, can I please have roll call?
Tom Callahan.
Here.
Jack Sarah.
Here.
Kenny Oswald.
Here.
Jack Beard.
Here.
Donna Mitchell.
Here.
Phil Tillett.
Here.
Diane Simmons.
Here.
Brenda Davis.
Here.
Judy Keys. Yes. Mark Jesse.
Here.
And Vic Stewart.
Here. I did, Ms. Keys did notify me, let me know that she was not going to be able to attend the meeting for tonight. So I can have that on the record. So tonight at the business meeting, right now I'm going to get it on the floor so we can have discussion about it. It's the matter of an ordinance authorizing the mayor to take action to abate the nuisance at 327 Broad Street, Elyria, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Can I get a motion to get it on the floor?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Sarah, second by Ms. Mitchell. So what we're here tonight, and I will kind of defer to the law director's office and to the assistant law director as they feel the need to weigh in on this. There's been a process where the owners have been, the timeline has gone beyond them to bring the building up to the building standards per the chief building officer. And it's an obligation for us at this time to weigh in on this. The most important thing that we needed to really take under advisement here is that it's the safety of the residents and the safety of those adjoining buildings based on what the chief building inspector's report has said. So at that time, if Law Director Deere or Assistant Law Director Bruning want to weigh in, and then we're going to have Mr. Farkas come in and weigh in on
Through you, Mr. President, I think that it would make the most sense for council to hear from the chief building official, Mr. Farkas. And I
Mr.
realize
Farkas?
that this is his first day back in the office, so
yes,
I
welcome.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
And sorry to put you on the spot there, Mr. Farkas.
That's quite all right. It's good to be back. Being in Florida, you just don't quite want to leave. Down to brass tacks, to give a little history regarding this site, it has been a continual complaint. Back in 16, a complaint was brought to our attention regarding the upper portion of the roof. The upper brick was buckling and in danger of collapsing. An order was subsequently issued to abate such violation, and that went through the court process. From our records, the case was dismissed and with options to refile. We're unaware why the case was dismissed. Ultimately, moving forward, Mr. Brubaker, Safety Service Director, indicated that he wanted to pursue, I think in 19, his own demo charges. He then processed his own order to demolish the building. We fast forward to now. The order was sent out to the ownership saying, please repair and complete multiple violations that were not only discovered by the fire department on their own pursuit for condemnation, but it reinforced the need to address it. Insert myself into my tenure as building official. Part of the building collapsed on the outer corner of the structure into the alley. The brick facade, upper quadrant, I'd say a good 30, 40-foot section collapsed onto the electrical panel, which created an immediate electrical shock hazard due to the hard rainfall we had. I immediately issued a cease and desist, had Ohio Edison come out. We shut down power to the building and barricaded off the structure. in hopes of facilitating some kind of immediate repair for the corner of the brick. The order was issued to mend the brick. The ownership was in process of obtaining a contractor to do so, but nothing was resolved. No repairs were made. The brick at this point is floating. It is non-supported. It is right now in the same condition it was when I inspected it a year and a half ago. We go to the interior of the structure. I was requested by the realtor at the time to make an inspection. The fire department was made aware of this inspection as well. They also completed the interior inspection. I brought in my inspection team, which is comprised of state certified inspectors like myself, specifying in specifics of electrical, plumbing, and heating, and myself as a building official, structural and mechanical. The overall assessment of the structure was deemed to be unsafe, not due to one singular aspect, but many. There are many faults with this structure. It has been in abandonment state for many, many years. It has faulty electrical. The lower level of the sub-basement is completely submerged. We were unable to inspect the structure due to the submerged water. The electrical panel in the basement, from what I could see visibly from the stairs, is at the cusp of almost being submerged itself. I assume at this point it may be underwater due to all the rain we've recently had. Moving on to the other levels, just a complete state of disrepair and leftovers from multiple, furniture. They have washers, they have wood piles. It's almost as if it's a storage unit in lieu of the former glory of a furniture sales store. The standpipe system is a fire suppression mechanism that's utilized as a fire department attachment when they come to fight a fire. It's typically focalized in the main stairwell. It consists of a large diameter pipe that runs from one level all the way to the other, where the fire department can access easily and pump water throughout the building to fight the fire. That has been dismantled, and an attempt was made, I want to say going back maybe a year and a half now, to repair it. Unfortunately, the repair was completed prior to permit process. An order was issued to please cease and desist until the proper contractor and licensed personnel were obtained to complete it. That again was not followed through. The standpipe system is still detached, non-functional. We have compiled with past evidence of the fire department and a reassessment from the fire department that in their opinion that this place and structure would be one they would watch. They would do damage control. Unfortunately, due to the way it's comprised now, fighting the fire would not be an option. You would have to put men and personnel in there per floor to fight this fire, depending on how bad it is and where it is. With the multitude of issues we had, and based on the International Property Maintenance Code, the code is pretty straightforward, and I just want to read a snippet for the board's use to understand that this book is designed as a checklist, you can say, to say here's what the code requires, and here's what it's asking of me to assure, not only for the owner, but as council has mentioned, the adjoining property owners and civilians. Section 108.1.1 of the 2018 International Property Maintenance Code states, when a structure or equipment is found by the code official to be unsafe, or when the structure is found to be unfit for human occupancy, or is found unlawful, such structure shall be condemned pursuant to the provisions of this code. It further states for unsafe structures that an unsafe structure is one that is found to be dangerous to life, health, property, or safety of the public, to the occupants of the structure by not providing minimum safeguards to protect or warn occupants in the event of fire, or because the structure contains unsafe equipment or is so damaged, decayed, dilapidated, structurally unsafe, or such faulty construction that is unsuitable for or repair to partial or complete collapse as possible. There are 3 bullet points that typically are met when looking at this kind of structure. Any one of these bullet points can be utilized when determining a structure to be unsafe. The first bullet point indicates it lacks sufficient or adequate protection for fire. For our inspection, it has none. It has been partially removed. Number 2 bullet point, it contains unsafe equipment. Every level we looked at, the equipment has been in such state of disrepair and neglect or is completely submerged, that obviously it's in an unsafe manner. The third bullet point is all or part of the building is likely to collapse, as the main structure of the building, due to the amount of materials in there, we couldn't fully assess every area because it was completely packed. And with the basement element being completely submerged, we do have partial verified collapse of the brick on the outside corner of the structure. The roof itself, by design, has some mansard masonry points that, per my inspection on the roof, somebody had made an attempt to, I guess, seal a leak. They stripped half the entire roof of material, stone debris, put that material on the other half, doubling the load, and put new material down, all without any kind of approval or permit to our knowledge. We don't know when this took place, but based on the visual damage and water leaks in there and the materials with mold and, in essence, crystallization, it was almost like walking into a cave. It was so damp and dank, the crystallization on the furniture. It was like something I've never seen. So that tells me it was leaking for quite a while and that it must have just been recently repaired. That ultimately led to the order I've issued and a resulting condemnation. I'm open for questions, if any.
For Mr. Farkas, in regards to his initial report. Ms. Davis?
Through you, Mr. Chair. With this water in the basement, has it leaked and caused a problem to the adjoining building?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Davis, unknown at this point. Access to the basement, it's pretty deep. It's hard to tell what adjacent structures, if any, have a basement that deep. I don't know if there were any open drains at one time that were in this sub-basement that are now plugged. I have no idea if it had a sump pump due to the collapse of the brick and the termination of the power. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Mr. Tolet?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. One of your statements was the building is likely to collapse. That was one of your parameters. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Tolet, the building facade has areas that are likely to collapse. As right now, the brick are floating. I wish I had a photo to show you that due to the freeze-thaw cycle, the water expands and contracts, moving the brick. And over time, and due to lack of maintenance, it subsequently results in a collapse of the brick and structure. I have no idea when or if any other portions of the brick are likely to do the same. With the high heat, again, the sun, it expands. You get cold nights, it contracts. That constant movement makes cracks.
And my second question is, because the brick, which is acting as a partial support, because of its degradation, is there any part of the building that's salvageable in your opinion?
Without a structural assessment, I dare not answer that question, as I'm not a structural engineer. My report is based on not only experience of 30-plus years as a construction guy and 20-some years as a code enforcement officer. The property maintenance code pretty much takes all that out of the equation. It gives you a bullet point. It makes it simplistic. Does it have safety features? Does it not? I could go on into many other citations that I noted. I don't want to bore the board, but it goes into, is it a concern for adjacent properties? Yes, it is. The neighboring properties are subject to this brick falling on their structure and or any unknown pedestrian that may wander too close to this structure. The concern has to be not only from a life safety standpoint, but at what point do we say this needs to be addressed immediately? And that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Mr. Oswald?
Through you, Mr. President. Mr. Farkas, first question, is the power still on?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Oswald. To my knowledge, the answer is no. Per our last inspection, they had no water, they had no electric. Gas, we dare not turn anything on to test. I would assume not, as the building did not have any kind of heat. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's off, but it had no power and it had no water.
Okay, thank you. Second question. Why isn't it roped off right now? Because I looked at that, and you're right, you know, at any time, bricks can be falling off. You would think we should, just for safety's sake, don't you think?
I have that in my order, and it's unknown as to why it was removed. I cannot answer that question.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Farkas. So I understand that there are two buildings on the side. What is the potential damage to those buildings from the Shane building?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mrs. Mitchell, one can use their imagination of a large section of brick collapsing at height through a lower structure. It wouldn't take much to penetrate and do significant damage and potentially cause death to any unsuspecting person that may be below. So I would basically say yes, it's definitely a concern.
Thank you.
Mr. Farkas, getting back to your question in regards to having it roped off, was it so much of roping or was it some type of net meshing around the building to have that come back inside the building where it's not being projectiled over top of the roping? Was that your recommendation, or what was your?
The initial order I processed for the facade was for blocking of the entire back alley, that no access, no pedestrian movement, and especially for the adjacent owners that may exit the rear doors.
Okay. Law Director Deary.
Through you, Mr. President. Mr. Farkas, please correct me if I'm looking at this wrong, but your order is to the property owner, is that correct? That is part of the correction order is toward the property owner, that he or she or the entity is to take those necessary steps?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Law Director Deary, the answer is yes, but the code also grants me authority to act to make that happen if it deemed immediate danger, of which I did, and it was at the time.
Was that removed?
Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, excuse me. Was that removed, Mr. Farkas? That the protective whatever?
Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Mitchell, it was removed unbeknownst to me.
Okay. Okay. Mr. President, if I may, a follow-up question. I know that you all did an inspection, and I'm curious as to how this could have gone on for so long, unbeknownst to the city. And I understand that we can't go in without the owner's permission, but it just seems to me that this got way out of hand, way fast.
I guess you can look at it this way, Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Mitchell. I guess you look at it this way. We're only aware, the building department, mind you, aware of what happens on the outside. We cannot get in unless we have written consent or an inspection warrant is obtained. Other departments have greater authority than we do, as we have to follow different red tape, I guess you can say. Action was taken regarding the upper roof brick bowing back in 16. We immediately responded. Action was taken regarding the brick facade collapsing, immediately taken. Once we were asked to make an interior inspection with written consent from the agents at the scene, immediate action was issued on my part to take immediate steps to abate it. So we have responded as best we can with the time permitted.
Very good. Okay. Mr. Tolet.
With Mr. Farkas at the stand, I'm going to ask the question of our attorney, that if we don't adhere to his action through abating, would we lose our insurance coverage if we didn't go by his recommendation? And would we technically then be putting the taxpayers in jeopardy?
Through you, Mr. President. I'm not going to go so far as to say that our insurance carrier would drop us, but I do believe, and it is my legal opinion, that the city would be put in a precarious legal situation. We have our chief building official who carries that title by way of being certified in this area. The city's been put on notice that this building is condemned, which is a legal definition. for all of the reasons that Mr. Farkas just laid out before you. It does put us in a vulnerable situation for liability purposes. And I don't use the word moral very often, but I think that there's some moral imperatives here, bearing in mind that there are strong opinions and feelings on all sides, as far as this is a building that is stood for a century and a half downtown, but there's historic buildings on either side of it. There's business owners and property owners at play, and there's residents also at play here. And I think those are all considerations. So back to your initial inquiry, we have not heard from our insurance carrier that they would drop us, but we also have not received, and I would be very shocked if we would receive in writing something from our insurance carrier that said that they would reassure us that they would be defending us in this type of situation.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, very good. With that being so, Mr. Serra.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we have to demolish this building, it's going to be a costly endeavor. If something were to go wrong with that building coming down, because it looks like it would be a tough demolition, where does that liability lie? Is that on the contractor? Is that still back on the city or the property owner? Or?
Through you, Mr. President, should that be the end result, any contractor that the city would engage, and this would be, we would treat it the way that we treat any other independent contractor with the city. We would ensure that the city would be indemnified, that the contractor carries the proper insurance, that they have the requisite experience and qualifications to do this type of work, and that all the necessary prep work would be undertaken.
Thank you.
Mayor Whitfield, he and I spoke this afternoon. He wanted to make a comments, or I guess a presentation is that he has to some in regards to the building in itself. So Mayor Whitfield, Mr. Farkas, if you could please just kind of stand by for any additional questions from that standpoint. Mayor Whitfield.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. Just briefly, because one thing I have realized through this process is that this has been going on much longer than I've been around, but I thought I'd bring you up to speed just kind of in terms of our involvement. So we hosted our first town hall meeting around downtown January of 2020, and Councilman Baer was there, Councilman Tollett was there. We met up on the third floor conference room to kind of talk about these problems that we thought would be coming. How do we redevelop these historic buildings? Who would know a month later, the news would be downtown with cameras because bricks were falling off of buildings. And we had a number of news stories come down and run stories about, hey, why are bricks falling off of buildings? And the Chronicle also ran an article on it. This is actually pictures of behind that building of those. And we had to block off Depot Street. I don't know if y'all remember that Depot was closed off to the public. But that really set us off on a path. One, we hosted a meeting that week to talk again with building owners, business owners down in the community. And what we heard was people wanted code to be enforced more aggressively to make it safer, that there needed to be more resources available to redevelop or demolish buildings, and there just needed to be more activity downtown. So out of that meeting, we started aggressively code enforcing downtown. We started, we actually did a tour of every building downtown, and as Mr. Farkas mentioned, we were only able to really address those buildings that we could only see from the outside, but we knew that there were some hot spots that we needed to get inside of, and this building being one of them. So what we did over that time as well is we worked with you all to stand up this downtown demo program. So we got that established that, hey, if you own a building but you're having problems paying for it, here's a program to help you pay for it. But we continued with that code enforcement. As you can see, we did some violations of March of that year. And then we started working on developing this CDC because we knew these sort of redevelopment projects cost a whole lot of money. And it's very rare that a private individual has the money to rehab something like this. Normally it takes a lot of tax credits and grants to pull these sort of projects off. So since then, of course, we've had this massive fire that I think has just heightened our fears and understanding of the danger of properties like this, but so we've continued to code enforce. We got the grant to establish the CDC. Now that's rolling, and the Elyria Community Partnership is in development now. We've gotten one demo grant through. We got 2 in the pipeline. And then another piece we heard was resources to redevelop. And so City Council blessed, us to be able to continue to develop this historical redevelopment grant program for those folks who didn't want to demo but wanted to redevelop their property. So again, one thing I wanted to share is that we just put so many tools and resources available for folks to do something, either tear it down, build it, or move on. And so we were at the point where, for this property in particular, I'm going to let Dawn speak to this piece. For this property in particular, we were at the process of starting to engage a structural engineer to really assess, because we heard the community interest in redeveloping it, to really see what would it take to stabilize this building and get the repairs, to even consider going after grants. But I'll pass it to Dawn and let you take it from here.
Ms. Calvert, if you please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. So as we've discussed at length already tonight, we did go through an aggressive code enforcement process, and 327 Broad Street was acknowledged and identified as a safety hazard, both structurally, and then also fire safety was a big component of that analysis that was done. But we know that it also has the potential for redevelopment, and there is interest in redevelopment. But with that comes a lot of unknowns. We have unknown costs, unknown, until a structural engineer goes in there and tells us exactly what needs to be done, that there are some unknowns there, and we absolutely acknowledge that. So our recommendation is, for an option for redevelopment, is to really look at the cost and work necessary to stabilize the building by working with a structural engineer. So really get to know exactly what that option is and what it looks like. And then the second recommendation is to support community in redeveloping a feasibility plan with a timeline centered around safety for residents. So those are really the options that we're looking at when we're thinking about the potential for redevelopment of that building.
Any questions for Ms. Calvert or to the mayor?
Yeah,
Mayor, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, and through you, Chair, we engaged with Hamid from KS Associates prior to this meeting. So we told him to hold off because we thought there's a decision here. But if Hamid could kind of speak to what his process would be, he's a structural engineer, what his process would be for kind of assessing the feasibility of this. Because one, we don't want to waste council's time, we don't want to waste community's resources. If this thing is just so it lacks the feasibility financially and safety, then we just need to kind of come to grips on that. But we need a professional who's a structural engineer to give us that. But Hamid, if you don't mind, if you could speak to what your process is, that would be great.
Come over where Dawn is at. Please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Just to make it clear, I've been a structural engineer for 40 years. Currently working with KS Associates. And the building, foremost important part of this discussion is safety. The building needs immediate fire protection system, which is a system that we recommend during construction to put in place so the fire department can be alarmed when there is activity in a building. That is one of the most important part of this process that need to be in place immediately. The other one is the fascia building. The skeleton not going to go anywhere. The fascia cosmetic element, as indicated before, the freeze thaw and the duration of the concrete timing and old concrete soften and lose the connection to the fascia that is holding the fascia into the concrete. That area is on old buildings all over the country. Not only Elyria, this is the problem in all the historic building in downtowns. That connection gets deteriorated and the bricks collapse on the sidewalks. And we have this in Cleveland, almost killed people several times last year. So that fascia need to be immediately restored. And if there is loose area, they need to be plied out of the building and stabilize it. Now, my recommendation for the structure is to do inspection of the structure and write a report what the structure can hold. The structure, as I see it, I'm talking about a skeleton. You gut it out, pump it out, clean it up, and then look at the skeleton. That skeleton is the structure. Can that structure withstand its own weight and withstand the roof load, the new fascia load, the new staircase, all the architectural fixture, and the property of the live load, which is people and all the equipment, live load and dead load that added for any businesses that moving in. That process takes time and effort because of the ornamental items that is in a building. You have to expose the columns, take sample of the columns, and make a recommendation if those concrete columns can be recycled. However, we're not talking about the couple $100,000 or we're talking about millions of dollars for establishing and going through the process of redevelopment of this building. But the process is first evaluation and inspection and evaluation of the building, write a report with recommendation and cost estimate. If a developer come aboard and wants to do the work and rehabilitate the project, then it goes to the architectural design, a structural architectural design for repairs and architectural elements. After the design, we have to go to the compliance, make sure everything to today's code, and the compliance get the permits, required permits for the developer. So the compliance, the permits, the design, then you can go through the bid process and go to the construction. It's a long, long process. But I cannot emphasize enough the safety that needed today is the fire protection system and is the fascia, ornamental fascia that need to be restored and cleaned up before somebody gets hurt. That is the two elements that was brought up before, and I emphasize on that as well, that need to be done. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And through you, Council President, the only thing I'd add to that is that through the conversation with Hamid, this sort of feasibility has to happen demo or rehab. There's going to be, and Mr. Hamid, you can maybe speak to that as well, that it's going to be at least a 6 to 9 week process, no matter what path is taken, just to assess the building. Even if we bid out for demolition, they're going to have to go through a process to do that.
Demolition actually has significant amount of reliability on structure engineers and the contractors. Contractors have to have an in-house or hire a structure engineer on board to design the construction of the building so it doesn't damage the adjacent property, it doesn't damage its own and kill people. All that stuff goes through as legal discuss it, all that discuss go to the identification process of the city of Elyria and pass that risk into the contractors. Of course, it's costly, but that's what the contractors do.
Mm-hmm. So just so I'm understanding it, and the council understands it, regardless of whether this building is going to be, we deem it to be for demolition or if there's a possibility of repair, this analysis still has to happen. Is
Yes.
that my understanding? Okay,
Yes.
very good. Any other questions for Mr. Tolet?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is to our attorney again. Could, for clarification, once it's turned over for demolition, who at that point holds the liability?
Through you, Mr. President. Well, as far as the inspection, demo, for demo purposes or for redevelopment purposes, so that would all be hashed out in the contract with the contractor as far as the liability that they would be responsible for their work, their due diligence, et cetera. There is primary liability with the property owner. However, I'm not privy to know what sort of insurance is presently being carried on that building. But as far as, I think, if I understand your question correctly, yes, once would be getting into that assessment phase, the contractor who would be carrying that out would be carrying insurance and on liability for their tasks.
Thank you. Miss Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, just so that I'm clear, I heard you say that the first thing that needs to happen is we need to secure the bricks. We need to fix that on the outside so the bricks don't come down and kill someone. And then we need to do the fire suppression. So even after we do all of that and spend that money, there is a very real possibility that the inspector, yourself or KS or whomever, goes inside and says, no, this can't be saved. So we spent money unnecessarily.
And thank you for the question. That process needs to be done today regardless. It doesn't matter. That money have to be spent. We don't need another, this is abandoned building.
Understood.
We don't need another fire downtown Elyria, and we don't need another brick falling and crashing on the sidewalk. That is really need to be happening today. It is that urgent. It is that cost has nothing to do with any demolition, any rehabilitation that's going to take 6 months or 2 years or 4 years to happen. That process needs to be done starting today.
Understood. Thank you.
Mr. Oswald?
Through you, Mr. President. By looking at that Shane building, can you tell if it was built as a standalone building, or back then did they build them like tied into the buildings next to it? Can you just look at that firsthand and kind of get an idea that was, like it was built, and then this one was kind of built next to it with its own block and steel and? Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you. Is a standalone building. It has significant foundation and significant skeleton, concrete skeleton, which I believe that was designed to build possibly expanding upward in the future, but never happened. So the size of the columns that I seen just visually looking at it, going to the couple floors, it seems like significantly over-designed.
Very good. Mayor Whitfield?
Yep, so my last two pieces that I wanted to share was, when you hear this sort of excitement and opportunity around redevelopment, and you hear that it's going to cost millions of dollars, a lot of times it's like, well, why would we even embark down this journey? It doesn't seem feasible. But to Mr. Hamid's point, in other cities, historical cities, they have to deal with these sort of historical building challenges and how to reuse them and redevelop them. And I think that's something we have to embrace as Elyria, is that we got these older buildings, and it costs more to redevelop them, and we got to be creative to redevelop them, which is why we went down this community development process, and which is why we engaged Joe Ratner. And Joe, if you could just wave your hand, So we engaged with Joel as that CDC consultant because he's done these sort of projects like you see here with the St. Luke's Manor. We're taking a building that's falling apart, bricks falling all over the place, to getting those historic tax credits, those, grants to multi-million dollars to redevelop a project like this. So, I just say all that to say that the excitement and opportunity, it is legitimate, and it isn't all on the city's dime to redevelop this. But it takes some sophistication, and it takes some patience and hope. But I just wanted to make sure that, we shared kind of where we were in this process, because we realized it started to take off kind of fast, and wanted to make sure you all knew there's been work done leading up to today, and to make these folks available if you had any questions.
Right.
But that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. We understand the building in its entirety and the long-standing history that it's had here in Elyria, and but we also have to take into the account the safety and the risk that's over there, and based on the recommendations of what's being moving forward with that. There was a resident here who had kind of shown some interest in this. So Ms. Kelly Kraus-Spanky, if you want to come up for a couple minutes to kind of briefly explain your thoughts in regards to this, and then we'll move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, Kelly Kraus-Menke at 716 Park Avenue in Elyria. And absolutely happy and very excited to share this with you. Well, first, this building is currently celebrating its 100 years of being open, even though abandoned. Its construction began in 1914, opened in 1921. So we really are in the middle of a good decision, right? Okay. So what I'd like to share with you are some thoughts that I was inspired by what's happened in the recent years, power outages, fires, things like that. It really brings to light the need for a project like this. In my interest, especially as a resident and also my background, I put some things together that I'd like to share with you today. So I would like the opportunity to develop the property and celebrate a century of business with private and public partnership for the revitalization of downtown Elyria. And that is especially over here. Okay. In light of interest in community development, which is my background. Thank you. All right.
Excuse me. Could you speak a little louder? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sure.
Us old people,
I'll go
yeah.
right in here. Okay. So here's a little outline, and I'll move through this. So just some topics. Here's the building as it is today. This actually has a nice view from the park right across the street, and I think what we could do with this building would be a much better view. So here's a little bit about it. What I see is a hub for commerce and community spirit. The project aims to save 327 Broad Street as a piece of history by restoring and redeveloping the 26,000 square foot Century building. Most importantly, 327 Broad Street is a catalyst to revitalize downtown, bringing the city, community, organizations, and private businesses together to spark economic development in downtown Elyria. And what that looks like at early light here is mixed use, residential and commercial retail. The upper 3 floors are going to be efficiency, 1 bedroom, below market rents to serve low-income residents in Elyria and senior citizens. Commercial and retail in the basement and first floor. And here's just some really early numbers. This also depends on what we find with the structural analysis, hiring an engineer, hiring an architect, and as you've heard, well, I'd like to see what the city is going to do in making a decision in that movement. Okay, so here's a little more detail on what I see these phases. I had the opportunity to tour the building with help from the current owners and their real estate agent. They allowed me to bring in some contractors, local contractors, which I'm particularly interested in. And here's, well, you can really read what some of these phases look like. In phase construction, first phase, really this summer, is focused on repairing those urgent needs. You know, I saw it as well as anybody walking past, as well as touring the building, what needs to be done. And I'll go through some of that detail in the next few slides. Phase 2, restoration. It's going to be deconstruction and restoration. Phase 3, this is where we're looking at possibly a total project of $7 or $8 million. And, okay, so we're going to take a quick look through some of the issues that were brought up today, right? We have an original standpipe, a standpipe replacement. Neither of them work right now. So we need a repair to the original standpipe would be ideal. We have brick to reconstruct on the northeast corner. I've also identified other areas with professional bricklayers and masons on window bays on the 3rd floor, as well as you can kind of see the work at tuck and point work where the floors are, really. So you'll see that along the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, and the roof. All right, some of the other items that have come up tonight. The roof. Yes, the roof does need to be cleaned. It needs to be repaired and resurfaced. And I did take a few pictures of what the ceiling looks like in some of the weak areas. The water in the basement has destroyed the heating system, so the boilers haven't worked in years. In a project of total redevelopment, that's expected, especially between putting in residential and commercial. We're going to have new HVAC across the building. That's fine. The challenge is getting the water out of the basement. So I want to look at replacing a grate on the back sidewalk that's allowing rainwater to come into the building, as well as replacing the sump pump with a new commercial sump pump. In order for that to happen, yes, the electrical does need to be moved. So I do have quotes to move the electrical panels to the basement. So they will be out of the sub-basement. The sub-basement can be dried and repaired. Okay, so here's what some of those quotes look like. And in this, yes, they can fluctuate. In any development, they will, and that should be expected. So we're looking at fire life safety, depending on the evaluation of the existing pipes, the needs for the building, as well as clearing the building, masonry, the back wall, as well as sidewalls, electrical, roofing, and some sub-basement parts and pieces. I have focused quite a bit on phase 1 because I know the urgent need to move on these pieces. Originally, I'd come to the city, my acquisition timeline was May, but I've been patient and remained strong on being here, being able to present this to you. So summer, here's a few details of what needs to be. Through all of this, absolutely working with the city, working with the building department, working with fire inspectors, that we're stepping off on the right foot, that we're moving in the right direction and bringing this building back to life. So here's a little bit more about it. It'll phase over 3 to 5 years, likely. You've probably all heard about the construction market. So how some of those costs and materials and how they'll fluctuate over the next few years are going to weigh on it, though that'll put in really good checkpoints for us with a lot of attention to historic preservation. So in this case, a community development project is necessary. While bringing together knowledgeable experts, experienced community developers, they're integral to this process. And here's a little bit about the project support that I've been able to work, and very thankful to those who have been involved. Confirmed partners are Blank Slate Elyria. We have expressed support on this project from Lorain County Historical Society as well as Heritage Ohio. Future partners, it's a polite request for the City of Elyria, Elyria Community Development Corporation, Lorain County, Cleveland Housing Network, the HP Group in the state of Ohio. And the estimates are from the following groups below: Finance Fund, HP Group, MetVet, and ES Long Electric. And this is a little bit about me. I'll tell you about that, so we don't keep my photo up there too long. I am educated by Cleveland State University's Maxine Goodman Levine College of Urban Affairs, and have you not heard, they're a top school in urban affairs. I'm very proud of that education. I hold a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Affairs, focused in historic preservation, and another bachelor's in political communication, as well as a master's work in real estate development and finance. After college, I worked for KeyBank Community Development Lending, where I worked specifically in tax credit equity on these kinds of projects. So I had some history of my own inspired here on this project. I did some private development, new development work with Forest City Enterprises for a little bit, and about 2008, that kind of market turned, so I went into communications and found myself working in the SaaS industry and technology for the rest of my career, and I spend my time raising my family here in Elyria. Very interested in making it a better place because of that. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Kraus-Menke, Mr. Oswald.
Through you, Mr. President. Believe it or not, I don't want to see it tore down. Okay? The idea that the structural right now being, if you look at the Uncle Vic's building, they're going to have a heck of a time tearing that thing down because of the concrete instead of the steel. So that's a good thing. The only thing that's scary is that it's a huge undertaking, and financing right now is a big thing. You can say that I'm going to get this and I'm going to get help, but it's not there, and then you're partially into it, and then we're left with an arbitrage. So that's my scary part, but I really do like the idea. When I started seeing some of the tiles in the front fall off, you can see some of the old facade. Now, that would be cool, and it is tough because you're in between two buildings that, it would be hard to take it down, but you got to think about those other two companies that are next to it. So I guess, it would be great, but yeah, it's not going to be a short-lived thing. It's going to be a long-term and a huge undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald, and thank you, Ms. Kraus-Menke, for making your presentation and your interest in the building. And I think we all would like this to all work out, but right now we have to take the approach about the safety of what's going on over there. Not saying that this is not feasible if there's an investor who wants to come in and do this, if it's Mrs. Kraus-Menke or somebody else over through there, or a group of individuals to make this happen, but we have an obligation for the safety of our residents and the adjoining buildings to move forward with this at this time. That doesn't mean the dialogue can't continue and have that over and through. So with that being said, we have a motion on the floor. So I'm going to read the committee report just so there's clarity.
Council President?
Yes.
Just the last thing to add to that is that, so from what I'm hearing, if we're going to continue both, it sounds like we can continue two threads. One is this thread that we're going to do right here, and the other is for the city to continue it, to explore what the salvageability and feasibility of the building being salvaged as well. So we'll continue down that path as council continues down this path, because no matter what, to Hamid's point, it's going to be some time,
Sure.
No matter what path we go down. So we'll continue down both tracks and see which one we get to.
Yeah, this right now is addressing the nuisance abatement for tonight. So we've considered the matter of an ordinance authorizing the mayor to take action to abate the nuisance at 327 Broad Street, Elyria, Ohio, under suspension of rules and declaring an emergency. Can I get a motion?
So moved, Mr.
Moved by
Chair.
Ms. Davis. Second by Mr. Tolet. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
Question's been called. On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the emergency, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried. There's no further business. I entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Saris, second by Mr. Bears. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.